to you, Tim.
Well, hello everyone. Lovely to be here. And thank you very much for inviting me. Particular thanks to Ivan and Jenny. Just so you know, Jenny used to live in Yeovil and a community church there. They had a lovely guy who used to run our work in Lebanon. Lebanon seems to be coming up this morning a lot. So, and that was where the connection with Kids Alive came from. So I run the UK arm of Kids Alive, and I'll explain about us shortly. If we can start the presentation, and I'm going to combine my sort of message about giving an introduction to Kids Alive with a message about God's heart for justice. And we saw in that wonderful song, Ascribe Greatness, a God of he's a God of justice. But I just want to expand before going on too much further about Kids Alive, about his heart for justice. When I moan at my laptop it's not working, it's because I haven't turned the on button. So, but Kids Alive, just to give you a brief summary, we're a Christian ministry and we care for some of the world's most vulnerable children. And it's really this Bible verse from Isaiah that inspires what we do. Learn to do good, but seek justice and rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless and plead for the widow. Now, I don't know what you think about when the word justice is mentioned to you, but my daughter said to me, she's grown up, she said, Dad, I explained I was coming here. She said, what are you going to share on? And I said, well, justice. And she starts sniggering. I said, what are you sniggering for? She said, Dad, justice reminds me of you at the airport. And so the story, which my family laugh at me about constantly, was we'd done a week, one of these package deals in Egypt or somewhere, a very hot country, and it was one of those where when you were coming back, it was like a midnight flight or something like that, late at night. And my son and I had been playing tennis, but it was like late 30s Celsius. The temperature was so hot, and I was so thirsty, and we'd had to check out and sort it out. But basically, I'd drunk enough. And we're on the coach going to the airport at about midnight, and so thirsty. So I thought I'll get a drink at the airport, go to get the drink, $10, so it's about £8 for a bottle of water. I'm not paying that. I'll get something on the plane. Sat on the plane, of course being Dad, I'm in the middle seat, all crumpled up like this. Air hostess goes by, would you like a drink? So, yes, please, can I have some water? So out she gets with what I can only describe as a plastic thimble, half filled with water. So anymore, and then she walked past and I managed to get 2 thimblefuls of water. Anyway, by about 4 or 5 o'clock, we're back at the airport at baggage reclaim. And guess what's at the back of the baggage reclaim? A vending machine. Oh, so I charge over while waiting for the luggage. Ice cold water. Brilliant. And but it was like £3.50 or something, cash only in those days. So I rushed back, cobbled together £3.50, and then ice cold water, put it in, and then the machine starts moving and the bottle of water comes out, and then it's stuck, and it's going like this. And I'm no, and it didn't come out. But then I couldn't believe it. And then there's a message on a little written thing. If you have any problems, call us on 0800. So, right, I'm ringing them. Bear in mind, it was 5 a.m, but by this point, I wasn't in a state to recognise it was 5. So I ring, we have no one available. Please call back after 9 o'clock. Right. Or contact us, fill in this form on the website. Right. So I go online. You do not have internet access. Sign up to the Wi-Fi for the airport. Eventually sign up. Well, by this stage, my wife's getting slightly anxious because there's some heavy suitcases and I'm needed over at the baggage. So she sends Becca over, my daughter, said, Dad, Mum's getting frustrated. You need it over there. And I said, well, I'm just sorting this out. So she goes back, and then sort of 5 minutes later, I'm trying to get on the Wi-Fi to lodge my complaint. And Becca goes, no, actually, my wife came over. She said, Tim, what are you doing? We've got to get the luggage sorted. They're about to come out. And I said, and this is in front of my daughter really loud, justice is more important than the luggage. And so I'm afraid to say that is my daughter's understanding of justice. I haven't taught her very well. But what's God's understanding of justice? Well, I did a bit of a study on it, and I'm no theologian, but what's really interesting is that Hebrew justice, or Old Testament justice, there's a couple of different words, but it's much more not along the lines of, I mean, you see the statue at the Old Bailey where there's some scales, and I'll keep coming back to this. So an injustice is when the scales go down. So it could be someone's they've had a wrong done to them and they've been burgled or robbed or something. So the justices in the law courts, they'll get that person will be punished or fined, and recompense will be given. That's sort of how I understood justice. But the Hebrew justice is, of course, that as well, but it's much more than that. It's like levelling up, as we know. So if there's an orphan or a widow, that's an injustice. So a woman or man of justice, or I think the Hebrew word is tzedzakoya or something like that, is someone who will serve that person and get the scales levelled up a bit more for them, and so that they're not poor, or that the widow you minister to them and care and have a heart for them. That's justice. That's God's justice. It's much more broad and holistic. I didn't realise that till I looked into it. Yes, of course, it's like the law courts, but it's much more someone. They didn't have sophisticated legal systems even in the ancient times, and we know where King Solomon prayed for a lot of wisdom, because he was the guy that everyone would come to, because he was the king. So or the leader, so everyone would come to him and ask him to be the judge and arbiter of this particular case. So justice is very much, you can see it in the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And blessed are, or whoever, it may happen in the kingdom of heaven, may happen on earth, but God is a God of justice. He wants the levelling up to happen. And if you're a widow or an orphan or whatever, so you've suffered a bereavement, whatever it may be, God will level it up. He has a heart for justice. He doesn't want injustice. And so that is really out of that the Kids Alive ministry sort of operates, and particularly inspired by that verse of Isaiah. I'll go back to that. Defend the fatherless and plead for the widow. We want to level up some of the world's most vulnerable children. So what we do, and I'll talk a bit more about Kids Alive. I don't know if you can see that, but we work in 7 countries, and this is normally for historical reasons, where a Christian missionary has been working in these countries and then asked us to support those. So I don't know if you can see or not, but Lebanon and Kenya, Zambia, and then in Central and Southern America, it's Haiti. God, what a place that is! Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Peru. And I'll explain a bit more about the ministry, but in each of those countries, the country director is charged with trying to find where the injustices are where this balance of scales are at their least. So where are the most vulnerable children? And in Kenya, for example, that could be in the slums of Nairobi. And honestly, that is where one of the families we serve lives there. It's just a massive slum. And the churches don't cater for kids, so we're working with churches to get kids work and kids ministry, so the young families, which is typically a single mum, bless her, who was abused and not treated very well by her dad and parents, and she doesn't know how to treat her kids, they can go along and be mentored and go into the church. We want to make it accessible for them. Or it could be further in the north, in a place called Corundus. Now, for those of you who have experience of Africa, rural Africa, it's all farming. So if it's a drought-prone region, it's a very fragile one, and we work in one where there's huge quarries nearby, and the kids literally, normally most of them are from single mums, or they live with their grandparents. They've just got no money, so if they want to be fed, they have to work, typically in these quarries. And we visited them. I wasn't allowed. A trustee who came, who was the photographer, went in and he saw it and said, basically what they do, so the big rocks the quarry merchants take, but the little stones are up for grabs, and they just sit there and bash them just like that. There's no health and safety or anything, or cuts on their fingers. And then they create a pile of aggregate, so that and then someone comes at the end of the day and offers them some money for that pile of aggregate, which is used for building and stuff. And that's it. So they don't go to school. 1 in 4's got HIV. Virtually all of them have lost one parent and live really in abject poverty. Or in Zambia, we've got a ministry that works with if you're a mum and you have a 4-year-old or under, or you're pregnant, you have a baby, and you're sent to prison, that child would normally go with you, unless you've got someone who'd look after it, which is very unusual, particularly in rural Zambia. So the kids come with them to prison, so we have a ministry that cares for them. Or what's been happening lately it's not really in the news, there's been droughts and all sorts in Zambia. which has led to a lot more starvation. So families could, Jenny touched on this earlier, they'd have a little and say, wait there on a street corner, and then they just go, and they leave them. They culturally don't have that strength of feeling towards kids that we would. It's sort of more of a function being a parent in Zambia, and that's a cultural thing we want to change. And they just end up living on the streets. So, and again, there was on the same trip, the trustee took these pictures, saw the street kids in Lusaka who all huddle up. Oh, they were a bunch of characters. I know it looks awful. They were so funny. None of them caught COVID, by the way. None of them have got the pandemic. None of them get ill, which is quite interesting. But a lot of them had just fallen out with their families. So they were quite easy to integrate them back into the family. Where there'd been abuse or something, they were much tougher cases for us to manage. And Lebanon. So Lebanon, we've been working there since the 50s, when a lovely American missionary gave us a building or a complex in Beirut. It's very hilly there, isn't it? It's a very hilly place, Beirut. And we've served vulnerable Lebanese in the 50s and 60s, but since the Syrian civil war started, it's mainly Syrian refugee families, and I'll come on to that a bit more. Haiti, what a place. And that's, as we all know, is one of the poorest countries in the world. We work sort of more in the north, which hasn't been as affected by the gang violence, which I'm sure you've all heard about. And we have a school and a residential program for the most vulnerable children. But Haiti, God, what a place. And Guatemala, Latin Central America, there's a real culture of machismo amongst the blokes. And this can lead to a lot of violence against women and against children. And then that sort of sexual violence against children, particularly, I'm originally from, you probably can't tell from my accent, from Newcastle upon Tyne in the 70s and 80s, very much a backdoor culture. Your neighbour would come in, let themselves in, put the kettle on, and then have a chat. And Guatemala's like that, and in the slum areas. But that does make it so if a single mum is at work or something, and not, young girls are very susceptible, and in this machismo culture, there's a lot of abuse, and there isn't really a judicial system to support them. One would argue there isn't one here as well. So I'll come back to Guatemala, and in Peru and Dominican Republic's a similar thing. But Peru, I went there, there's such a geographically diverse country. We went to a project in the mountains, it was stunning, but lots of poverty, and there's no recourse to justice in cases of violence, sexual abuse against children and women. So that's when we work in a project in the jungle. You don't think you're in the jungle, other than the fact you're being eaten alive by mosquitoes. Mosquitoes love me. At least something's attracted to me. And then and we work in the slums as well. So and Dominican Republic is another. Because we went there on holiday, and so when I joined Kids Alive, I've sort of seen Dominican Republic as quite a nice sort of Caribbean, but God, it's got some rough areas, and the education system just is non-existent. So it's not a great place to be a child. I don't know if any of your school teachers are here. You probably can't see all this, but that says reading at the top, the black one, and the other one says mathematics at the top, and then there's all the South American countries listed, apart from Haiti, because they can't even collect stats because it's so dysfunctional. But if you look at Dominican Republic, the second one from the bottom on reading, they're not very, that's 8% of students or pupils have reached a certain standard, and 1% in maths. It's just totally dysfunctional. So we have a lot of schools, and I'll explain about how it works. But we have 4 goals for each child. And I start thinking justice, God's heart for justice now. We want to get these kids back up and, so they know God. And we have 4 goals for each one in each of the projects. We do want them all to become Christians and their families, but we don't shove it down their throats. But all our projects just about all of them are in a Christian context. So start the day with devotions and Bible studies and all the rest in the schools. And we'll see shortly, and we'll show you a video later, of how important it is that they're so traumatized. Only God can really heal them in many ways. You can have all the trauma techniques, which I'll come on to, but so we don't shove it down their throats, and they don't have to be Christians to care for us. It's just all the projects are lovely, happy Christian environments, despite all the doom and gloom. And number 2, physical well-being. Well, I think we'd all say that. We want them to have clothes, food, and all the rest. But emotional is a big one because we're traumatized. So as you probably know, if a child's been tough enough, if an adult's been traumatized, let's say a soldier coming back from a station, PTSD, we all know that post-traumatic stress disorder. But if a child's been traumatized, it's harder for them because with trauma, they can't use the rational part of their brain as well. And because the brain's not as developed, it means that they can be very irrational. So they could withdraw or just not be able to take information. They're in stress mode all the time, especially those girls in the Guatemala project. Terrible issues as child sexual abuse. They just can't function. Their brains, and if that's not dealt with, that will stick with them for life. So we want them to have emotional well-being, and we want them to be equipped for a life of independence and service. So they're well-educated. When they leave our care, that they want to give something back, and many of them do, and some of them work for Kids Alive, and they've just got such a heart. I mean, I was blessed with a scholarship for Geordie kids from single-parent or orphan families, and I went to a boarding school in Hampshire, and I'm still to this day not sure whether that was a good thing, but I still always, you want to give something back when you've been blessed by others, and the kids at Kids Alive are very much like that. And then finally, live in a community free of fear and violence. We want them in families. We don't want them in orphanages, although we do have to take them in for short-term residential care. And this is where we become an NGO. We do a lot of advocacy work with communities, work with churches and schools so they can influence the communities and advocate for the vulnerable children there. And the projects, they vary. We do about 40 in those 7 countries. Could be a school, could be a Hope Centre, community centre. I'll give you some examples in a minute. And we also have independent living programs. They're all different types of projects. And just a word on the trauma program. So as well as being in a Christian environment, we use a Christian trauma program that was developed at Texas Christian University by the Karen Purvis Institute. And the pillars of that are that the child learns to trust adults again, and that they engage the rational part of their brain. So doing things like just art and creative crafts are great ways. Sometimes they need so badly traumatized and damaged, they need specialist interventions. In the Guatemala project, this one, that all the girls have a program, a trauma recovery program, and that's steeped in prayer as well. So the trauma is important for that restoration. Trauma, we believe, injustice, it levels the scales up of injustice. And then, as I say, this is just daily life. This one, these cutie kids at a preschool in Zambia that we do in the middle of nowhere, just praying before and after school, posters, Christian posters, and we just a lot of prayers. A lovely ministry, which I'm going to talk about a bit later. So I'm going to give you some examples of some of the projects we do. So in the heart of the Nairobi slums, they're brutal. It's millions of people to cram together within a 2.5 mile radius. But a church gives us a presence there at Peppercorn Rent, where we minister. We work with schools and churches. So the schools referred school dropouts to us, which means it's got to be a pretty dysfunctional family if the kids are dropping out of school. But of course, they don't have the emotional resilience. And they come to the Hope Centre to stay at school when something goes wrong. We work with a family, we strengthen them, mentor them. I say we, that is the royal we, by the way. I don't do all this work, I'm not sure I could. Mentor them, and they settle into the local churches. The churches in the slums, when we started working there a few years ago, didn't have any dedicated kids work. So we've been working with them in producing kids programs. They do Bible weeks during the holidays and play games and learn about Jesus. It's just a wonderful, wonderful project. And and the churches are just so keen to work with us. It really is great. And the schools and the local authorities. And here's the one in Lebanon. You can't really get it's called Dar al-Awlad, which means orphanage, and that's got a school where Syrian refugees come, some of the most vulnerable. We're so well known that by word of mouth we have to take on some of the toughest cases. But it's not much fun being a Syrian refugee. The mums in particular, they live in a storage container or rent it. They're a caretaker for a building, so there's like 4 or 5 kids plus the parents in one room, with that sharing a loo, with the sinks, the kitchen's the same as the room. It's just not very nice. And then they can come, and it's like an oasis coming to Dar al-Awlad for the kids. They get an education, they have fun, they learn about Jesus. It's obviously a very sensitive, because Lebanon, as Shakir will tell you, is the only Arab country where the gospel can be shared and where Christians can live openly as Christians. And the country director's heart there is that we will witness to the Syrian refugees while there, and then when they go back, and goodness knows what's happening over there at the moment. Thanks for sharing, Paul. But We don't know are they going to be able to return one day? But if they do, let's hope they go back and they know about Jesus and they can speak positively about him and Christianity. But we support the families at this. There's a primary school there. There's even a project we call Oasis, which I'll touch on shortly. But I thought was a preschool program. And until I visited it, and they said, yes, it is a preschool program, but kids can be as old as 13. I said, 13-year-olds? Because I visited the classroom, we've got this lad up here and a little one down here, and he was 12 years old, but he'd never been in a classroom in his life. So this class prepares them for primary school, and then they can get in there. So I wouldn't fancy being the teacher there. But the Lighthouse project as well, this is for the mums. We realised that during pandemic we're giving out free food to some of the more vulnerable families. Oh, life is grim for the mums, the Syrian refugee mums. They're not really honoured in the family, and they have no community. That's what we miss the most. So if I go back to the Dar al-Awlad, so you see the top story there. That was a leaky, horrible, like the top of a car park, but we couldn't use it. And a lovely American donor gave us some money, so we refurbed it, and that's it there now. And that's the community centre for the mums. And they come along, and we do twice weekly Bible classes. We get 40 to 50 come along to every one. Just amazing. And we teach them about mental health, their rights. Social workers are there. They do livelihood crafty stuff as well. And then recently, in June and in November, we had what we call couples nights, because can't you get our husbands involved? We thought, cool, what can we do for this? This is, because we don't even know if they're Hezbollah, we don't know, we've got safeguarding, we've got kids we've got to look after, all this, that and the other. Anyway, so we've started reaching out to the dads. I'd really welcome your prayers for this one. And the dads came along to a couples night, and the first one was just fun and games, and they did silly stuff, and it was great to see them working together. It was lovely, the couples there. And then the second one, there was a message, but it had to be by a guy. I mean, the lady that runs our Lebanon project, Denise, she's obviously a woman, but for her to teach to men would probably be culturally inappropriate. So we've got a guy from the local church came in and gave a talk on godly parenting, didn't preach the gospel as openly, but the Christian stuff is starting to filter through, and now we're reaching out to the men as well. And they love us because we're looking after their kids, and their wives are happy as a result of working with us. So it really is a wonderful project. So just to give you an update on the Troubles, so we've, as you all know, tens and tens of thousands of displaced families from the south who told they had to leave, moved up north into Beirut, and some went back to Syria, some just many camped on the streets, these pretty much on the doorstep of Dar al-Awlad. And so we started ministering to them, giving out mattresses, food. We have a project in, how's it pronounced, Shake? Sidon or Sidon? Sidon.
But in Arabic it's called
Sidon. Okay, well that's that, the one at the end, and we rent that building at the top, so that we've got Dar al-Awlad in Beirut, and then further down Cedar, we've got this project here, but the bombs were just going off. We're so close, and of course they're getting kids' traumas coming back to them and everything. So we started giving out the first thing. We had an appeal, and our supporters were wonderful, and we got mattresses, which was a real, just sleeping on hard floors, either on the pavement. A lot of the schools, local ones, not our one, but the public schools were closed, and then the families would go into those schools, and they were crammed in there, so the displaced families would be in schools. So we visited those schools as well, and they'd come to there was one, it was horrendous, because we've got good relationships with the nearby schools, as you can imagine. They got a bout of head lice, as if they didn't have enough to deal with. And so can you help us with the head lice? All this, that, and this. So we're helping them with food distribution. And in the top right, fortunately the weather was reasonably good. Let's keep praying that, because there's still not all back despite the ceasefire. There's many still to make their way back. The weather has been good, and we're just getting a bit cold. We're concerned it's going to get cold. So we did talks in the playgrounds on mental health and how to stay positive, on what their rights are, helping them at all. And we've just had a conference with a lot of Christian leaders there, church leaders and other NGOs, as how can we serve particularly the Christian villages that have fled north and need to go back or can go back, but some of them haven't got, they've just got rubble to go back to. So how can we serve them? So that's all that's happening lately. The latest developments in Syria, goodness knows how that's going to develop, but let's keep praying. Wouldn't it be wonderful that the refugees feel they could go home? I just don't know. I mean, Paul and Shaka probably know the situation better than I do, but your prayers for Lebanon would be so valued.
I believe some are returning south, but they're returning to tents where everything is flat.
That's what we'd heard, Paul. It's not great, so they still need help and care and love. Yeah. I mentioned the babies. This is a wonderful project, the babies in prison. So we work with the Zambia. This is particularly gets my heartstrings because it's all about justice, and it's my understanding of justice, which is legal justice. But the mums normally are pretty bad. They're bad uns, or they should be in prison. So these are not the most savoury characters, many of whom are in prison for abandoning their children. And but we go in, we provide quarterly packs. So, I mean, we're not allowed to take pictures of in the prison, which is a shame, because that would show you how bad the conditions are. But there's no nappies, there's no hygiene products, there's no toys, there's no books, there's just nothing for the kids. So we're working with the authorities. We signed an agreement with them. We can now access the prisons. They're keen to work with us on introducing childcare facilities in the prisons. The president even pardoned a number of mums in the prisons, so that was as a result of ours and other advocacy and lobbying. That was great. And then we visit some of the prisons. We do a guest service, which is this one. We put on a barbecue meal for them, and all the other inmates come along. They love it, and they're all making commitments to the Lord, saying sorry, and this, that, and the other. But the hidden victims, of course, are the older siblings. So bear in mind, it's normally a dysfunctional family. Like these two twins here were just left to it, and the dad was so ashamed he just abandoned them. And they came to our care. God, they were a nightmare. A pair of 6-year-old boys fighting all the time, fighting with each other, fighting with the other kids. Well, and then they could show signs of loveliness, so as you can imagine with kids. But clearly it was the trauma. And this is the thing, when all the staff are aware about trauma and everything, they don't see it as naughtiness, they see it as trauma. And we've cared for these twins, and it looks as though we've found something. The mum, they can't go back to their mum, she's still in prison. The dad's, we can't find him. But we think there's an auntie or an uncle who will care for them, but he's not in a position financially to do that. So we work on the livelihood, build that up, get them into a local church. And there's lots of churches in Zambia. It's a real Christian country in many ways. And so that gives you a flavour of that project. I'm nearly finished on giving you flavours of our projects, but the one in Guatemala is quite powerful. So the courts refer the worst cases of child sexual abuse to us. So the worst cases, it's pretty grim stuff, some of them, but the common denominator is the parents aren't supporting the child. It's not safe for the child to go back. Girls come to us, sometimes it's a police raid. The girl comes to us just with a nightie or pyjamas on and comes under armed guard back to us. We give them a nice pack, like that purple backpack, or she hasn't had anything nice like that. And then they stay with us, normally 18 to 36 months, and they get the best trauma care and Christian care. So they stay in one of the rooms and with a house mum or a tia, which is Spanish for auntie, and they really are cared for. And of course they've got the other girls there that they're not going through it on their own. It's not just them, which helps. They get trauma care and they get a lot of Christian input. And the big thing is we pursue justice in the law courts for them. And this is where the justice bit really comes in. And that's so reassuring. And I think about 80% of the cases we take on are successful prosecutions as opposed to 5 or 6% for the country. But crucially, we train. So we're pretty good. We've got a separate office that pursues those cases, and it also pursues other cases where the parents, where the child doesn't need to come into residential care. And they then train the judiciary, so they have what's called Gesell chambers, which sounds a bit intimidating, but basically kids can give evidence over a video, and it's child-friendly evidence, and we train them on how to pursue justice and how to get successful convictions, which in turn sends shockwaves through the local communities. And it really, we think, it's very hard to measure, it's having a big change. And that's a big thing where the scales of injustice are starting to come back up. But that's a beautiful project. I visited that one a couple of years ago, and it really was everyone was so happy, which I'll come on to. Yeah, and this. Do you remember, we're all doomed? The trouble is, I mean, Jenny and Ivan were chatting about this last night. I often get asked, don't you get a bit down working all this doom and gloom? And we've had it since the pandemic, haven't we? I mean, I don't recollect in my lifetime it being so miserable. The news viewings are at the lowest ever because everyone's sick of hearing bad news. We had war in Ukraine, inflation, we got Sudan problems, and I'm coming here and telling you about even more doom and gloom. We're all doomed. But the message from Kids Alive, the best way I explain it, well, I chatted to someone, one of the guys, because I feel a bit of a fraud. It's not me dealing with the kids, these traumatised kids on the front line. But those little boys from Zambia that have been abandoned, when I was being told about those by a lovely young lad called Kapemba, who serves them, I said, Kapemba, doesn't it get you down? Having to do all this traumatised kids, badly behaved kids, day in, day out. He says, no, because we see them come out the other end. And we see what God does to them, and it's just transforming. I'll play you a story shortly about that. And Caroline and I, my wife and I, we went to, I don't know if you have them down here, but the National Trusts where we live in Cambridgeshire, there's 2 or 3 that every Christmas, we went to visit one. We always do this walk around the gardens, there's lovely deer and everything. But one year there was all these cables lying around and sort of light bulbs and everything. What's going on here? And then we saw a poster for the light show. Well, it looked awful in the daylight, but when we went round this light show, we're going to do it again this year, it was stunning. I mean, the bottom right, these were just pictures I took on my mobile. The bottom right one was a publicity one, but you just walk, it was just beautiful. So all these horrible cables and lights just look stunning. And sometimes God works the best when it's dark, the darker it is. And I think the message from Kids Alive, from me to you, this whole thing of justice is that, wow, the breakthrough and the transformation that God can give is just unheard of. And no matter how dark the situation, perhaps even in the darkest, God's at his most spectacular. He certainly was in these light shows. They were astonishing. And so I'm going to share now a video. How do I turn this on? Do you turn it? It's quite. Please, yeah. I hope you can hear it all. It's just a bit I mentioned to you.
¿Por qué estaba en Oasis?
Porque mi papá me abusó. Yo fui abusada por un señor que no conocí hace 7 años. Él me llamaba a su casa y como yo era niña obediente, le hacía caso a mi mamá siempre me mandaba.
Su corazón está roto, yo podría decir cuando ellas vienen acá, su corazón está roto, no tienen esperanza, no hay propósito, no les interesa, ¿verdad? No hay razón del por qué luchar, el por qué levantarse, el por qué hacer las cosas. Cuando pasa un trauma en la vida de una persona es como un ácido que está cayendo en su cerebro, matando las células nerviosas, ¿verdad? Las neuronas. Situaciones, ¿verdad? Que ellas viven están devastadas, ¿verdad? Desilusionadas, no se sienten amadas, muchas veces traicionadas, ¿verdad? Porque las niñas han sido abusadas por sus propios papás o personas muy significativas para ellas. Entonces es muy difícil que ellas puedan confiar en las personas. Para mí la satisfacción más grande, ¿verdad? Es que ellas están listas para poder hacer la denuncia, ¿sí? Que ellas están empoderadas y lo pueden hacer. Cuando dictan la sentencia y todo, hizo justicia por la vida de la niña. Es un proceso de restauración, ¿verdad? para la niña.
El 22 de diciembre, mis tías me ayudaron a recibir a Cristo en mi corazón. Cuando Dios entró en mi corazón, yo sentí algo diferente, me sentí limpia, ya no tanto avergonzada, me sentía como hija de Dios.
¿Cuál es su sueño?
Mi sueño es que él pueda seguir a Dios, pedir perdón de todo lo que ha hecho. Yo he perdonado a mi papá
Yo siempre digo que las chicas de Oasis son como mis heroínas, porque a pesar de todas las cosas que ellas han vivido y todo, siempre ellas te están animando.
The only thing that always keeps coming to my mind is God is a warrior. And the fruit we see can't be by our hands. We're not good enough. So the fruit we see is God's hands.
If that's not light in the darkness, I don't know what it is. It's so beautiful. It's such a, when God can work like this, it is amazing. It really is a spectacular light show, and very, very beautiful. Now, with all the great trauma care and the neuroscientific techniques, they're good and they work, but nothing can like God can in their lives. And there's something special. Like a little girl, there's something very, very special and extra over and above all the trauma care, which they've got to have. So I'm coming. So I hope we clearly explain the justice. You know, we want the justice to come back up. That girl is in a place of the scales have come back up again for her, and it's wonderful how God can work there. So if you do, we really do welcome prayer support, and if you do want to get more involved, just let me have your name and email address, and we'll add you to the e-newsletter which we send out. If you haven't got an email, that's fine. Give us your address. We send out some. I think 6 monthly, Jenny, will be good for 6 monthly prayer requests. And we always need child sponsors. So if any of you feel a calling to sponsor a child, or you felt God's prompting you to do it, please let me know. I've left a leaflet in there. What's that? Sorry. You can go on to the next one. There it is. Yeah. It could be just. Oh, you know, I said there's got the big and little kids in the preschool at Darlaw. That's the two of them. He was a right character. He must have been about 11, and his mate was like 7 or something. And but to sponsor a child through their school, and in Africa that would include school dinners at our school, so that means they don't have to work, and if they're a young girl, much less likely to be married off young, because that can be the problem. In Zambia, it's a real problem with young girls get married off, and they have to, or they starve. There's just no choice. So going through school, having the free dinners, being educated, 44% of Zambian girls pull out a secondary school education, and only about 60% go to primary school. Rural Zambia is even worse, and this is like Peru in the middle of nowhere, where the injustices are at their greatest, because there's no impunity, there's no systems. Or so that's these are such cuties. That's the Zambia school visited, and that's the preschool, and they are just such a bunch of cuties. So and the other thing is, I used to work at World Vision. There's a lot of child sponsorship there, and we did some research, and it just shows their emotional well-being is better because they know someone, particularly in a Western country, they see a white person, a black person or a Westerner as you know, this is a big, it's like posh. We got a funding award from a Christian trust called the Sir Halley Stewart. Sir Halley, there was a sir in it, and they all thought, oh, this is wonderful. So there's something about feeling special when they're sponsored. So if any of you can do that, that's great. If not, or if you know someone, if not, no, please do pray for us. But thanks again, everyone. It's been so nice to see you all and meet you all, and I hope I've shared a bit, I haven't gone too much about the charity, and shared about the God's heart for justice, because that applies to everything, not just Kids Alive. And bless you all. Thank you so much. Thank you.